So, a very large portion of the internet has already taken note of Death Note, the live-action adaptation of a manga and anime of the same name that reached massive popularity in the mid to late 2000s. For those unfamiliar, the story of Death Note follows Light Yagami, a high school student who finds the eponymous Death Note, which allows him to kill anyone in any fashion he could possibly imagine, pretty much, provided that he knows their name and what they look like. He then uses the power of the Death Note initially to bring justice to the most extreme criminals under the name of Kira, or Killer. But ultimately, power, as it is wont to do, corrupts absolutely. And the story follows Light's descent into utter villainy. The first half of the series, aka the good part and the only part I consider canon, pits Light against the brilliant, quirky, and truly bizarre detective L. The second half, which doesn't fucking matter, but why not, because, spoilers, it's a 15-year-old series, involves L dying, in which he is immediately replaced by two sad and desperate attempts at recapturing his character. Fight me on that. Anyway, speaking of the age of this series, being 15 years old, why the fresh fuck, Aiden, are you talking about it? Well, I'm talking about it because it recently received a United States live-action film on Netflix. And I need to specify that it is a US live-action film adaptation because there have already been 4 Japanese live-action films adapting various aspects of the manga, that is the comic series, that have been released since 2006, as well as a live-action television series, and even a musical. But out of all of this, the only thing that I ever bothered to watch was the first film, which I thought was thoroughly mediocre. Death Note があれば犯罪のない理想の社会が生まれる。未来は僕の手に委ねられたんだ。驚いたが、まさかとは思ったが、キラ、お前は直接手を下さずに。Still better than the Netflix adaptation. This Netflix film immediately came under fire shortly after its mere announcement, but not for any of the reasons one might speculate. Were people upset because this is an adaptation of a 15-year-old manga that reached the height of its popularity and relevance a decade ago? No. Were people turned off because there's already a fantastic anime adaptation, and further 4 fucking live-action films that are already extant, rendering a United States version completely pointless? Well, yeah, sure some, but that still wasn't the source of the major ire. Was the average person disinterested because there's never, ever been a decent Western adaptation of an anime or a Japanese video game? And yes, as much as I love the Resident Evil movies, they absolutely do not count, because to imply that they have anything to do with the video games is an utter absurdity. The Resident Evil movies are about camp and Mila Jovovich's perky little titties, not about Biohazard. But anyway, no. While certainly there is no love for attempts at remaking anime or games into live action, particularly in the West, once again, that wasn't the real problem that anyone seemingly had with Death Note. No, the real problem with Death Note was the casting. Specifically, it was that the lead character, Light Yagami, was to be played by a white kid, and the setting was to be moved to Seattle, Washington, a city that, let me start out by saying this, is 66% Caucasian. And somehow, that was racism on par with Jim Crow. Of course, some on the other side of the aisle were equally incensed with another casting choice, with the character L being portrayed by a black actor. But the majority of the ire again rained down upon Nat Wolff for his casting as Light Turner. Look, see, this shit irritates me too, but not for the same reason it irritates them, and we'll get to that. Twitter, though, as usual, lost its collective shit over the announcement of Wolff for the role of Light. But there was little public complaint, at least initially, over the casting of Lakeith Stanfield as L, which they conveniently explained away because, apparently, according to Twitter and various other media outlets, L's race doesn't matter, only Light's does? Look, for people not familiar with this series, the thing that made it interesting was the cat and mouse dichotomy between Light, also known as Kira, and L, as they essentially played a game of 4D chess with one another. If Light's race matters, and I actually don't really think it does, as race very rarely matters in most films, not all, but in most, then why doesn't L's race matter? Well, of course, because we cannot criticize the casting of a black man in an adaptation of source material wherein the original character is not black. See the fantastic flop, wherein the casting of Michael B. Jordan as Johnny Storm, a white guy, was fine, while still maintaining the casting of Kate Mara as his sister Sue Storm? What? While there were a few people who were pissed off at the changing of the race of an iconic character, absolutely there were people who were pissed off. To imply that there was no outrage would be patently false. That outrage was minimal, but as is typical in current year, the outrage in response to the outrage was the real star of the show. That is, much like with the Make Mine Milkshake debacle, a small, very small, minute minority of people criticizing a casting choice were instantly turned into a massive media shit show, with cries of the rampant racism inherent in all of these smelly nerds who we hate so much, but oh please, oh god, we desperately want their money so bad, please give me your shekels. And you know what? I was one of those smelly nerds who certainly critiqued the casting of Jordan as Johnny Storm. And do you know why? Because of the mere fact that they kept Sue Storm white, and it made it obvious that the change was only being done to garner the exact backlash that they received, no matter how minuscule it actually was. Myself, like many others, questioned the decision because it forced viewers to immediately ask questions about the backstory of Sue and Johnny that we never would have previously asked. Namely, what the fresh fuck is the relationship between these two characters? Are they half siblings? Is one of them adopted? And as it turns out, the adoption story was the explanation, and that's fine, but it made it fucking obvious that the choice was intentionally designed to generate controversy, to drum up interest in that dumpster fire of a film, while, by the way, remaining safe simultaneously by not having a biracial romance between Reed Richards and Sue Storm in the film. Do you see what I'm saying? They kept Sue white and made Johnny black to bring up some racial controversy, but not bring up enough to piss anyone off. And I guess with that, I'm sort of unintentionally moving into the crux of my argument with all this. But hey, I don't want to shoot my load off just yet. So let's leave Fantastic Flop, which is certainly a film to keep in mind, behind, and we will move back to Death Note. So the internet was ablaze with cries of whitewashing for the character of Light, while actively tweeting that he was blackwashing. Very little criticism was lobbed toward Lakeith Stanfield, because it's, again, only wrong to change the race of a character if you're changing that character to white. Let's be perfectly honest. It's like it's only terrorism if it's a white guy going berserk, but not when a brown person drives a truck of peace through a crowd of people while shouting about his Hawaiian-themed cafe, Aloha Snack Bar, as we all know. That is, of course, merely the behavior of a confused lone wolf. In fact, this article from The Hollywood Reporter actually argued that one of the faults in Death Note as a film is the fact that L's race was not brought up constantly, as if the other characters should be surprised that the genius detective is a black man. Don't know why you would want the film to do that unless you yourself think there is something weird about a black man being a genius, Rebecca's son. And yeah, of course, that is how we encourage people to not be racist, by incessantly talking about race. That's how that works. Anyway, last week the Death Note movie came out on Netflix, still to the cries of whitewashing, and it is currently being absolutely roasted on IMDb. And, I watched it. I watched it so you don't have to, and I pretty much hated it. But my hatred of this film and the nausea that it induced in me had absolutely nothing to do with the race of the characters. It didn't even really have anything to do with the casting overall or inherently, because director Adam Wingard, who throughout interviews has made it clear that he is familiar, if not an outright fan of the source material, made the absolute brilliant choice to place Willem Dafoe in the role of the Shinigami death god Ryuk, a role that Dafoe was born to play. And as such, here's the sad bit, an ultimate waste of a legitimate perfect casting decision in what is overall a turd of a film. No, my issues with the film were multifold, but before I tear into this movie, let me be clear that it is actually quite visually interesting at points. In fact, to bring it back to Willem Dafoe, the handling of Ryuk is often out of focus or obfuscated. That is, they don't show very much of what he looks like. That is an aspect of horror that I often and frequently champion. However, the visuals, while quite striking at points, are also frequently ruined by some of the teen film conventions that I have previously complained about and will continue to complain about. As proof, I'm going to show you a few seconds from near the end of the film. Nice subtle shot. awful embarrassing shot. Nice cinematic shot. Do you see how it's not consistent? But anyway, let's get into my numbers, shall we? Since I love numbers, but since I've given the film a bit of praise, all the praise I'm willing to give it, let's get into the real fucking problems. 1. The writing is abysmal, and the characters are absolutely insufferable teen high school stereotypes. Specifically, they are American high school stereotypes, which is a big part of the problem. A lot of this was perhaps lost in translation, and I get that, but I despise American teen movies. They are so bland, so repetitive, and so unoriginal. One of the major flaws of this film is that it relies on these stereotypes like they're required, and we will understand soon why. 2. Everything interesting about the mildly philosophic questions posed by the premise of having the ability to kill indiscriminately as a force for good, and the corruption of man to his own ego, are all lost. And while I will get a bit more into that, analyzing film is not my forte, and I know for a fact that ER is going to be covering this film in exquisite detail, and will thoroughly explicate from just what a fucking height every single aspect of this movie dropped the ball in that department better than I ever could. 3. Wolf is fucking awful. His performance is outright comical at multiple points, particularly when I'm not really sure if it's supposed to be. And that has nothing to do with his race. It has to do with him either being talentless or being mishandled by the director. Lake Keith is another horrid combination of either performance or talentlessness or writing or handling, in what sort of combination I know not what. But he does not come off as the brilliant, quirky autist of the manga and anime, but rather as a whining, annoying, crybaby autist who needs his blankie, and at no point had even a fraction of the charm of the character he's supposed to be playing. He is still not as awful as Wolf's Light, and does maintain some small aspects of the L character, but he's still terrible. Mia, next, whose role was completely rewritten and the plot itself rewritten around her character, away from the 4D chess and the cat and mouse shit into a ham-fisted high school romance plot because American movie, is also completely flat and awful, and generally characterless, except when she is suddenly developed into a character only to act as a scapegoat for Light, so the actual descent of a man into pure villainy, completely removed from the film's themes, is placed upon her, instead painting Light as a sort of anti-hero at its most extreme, with all the gravitas and development moved onto Mia because, well, we just can't have our protagonist actually be the bad guy now, can we? You know, the entire reason this fucking series was interesting in the first place? Death Note has many of the same beats as Breaking Bad, and it was so popular for the exact same reasons. While Light from the very beginning of the manga and the anime always exhibits signs of sociopathy, it is in watching the descent of a character into total amorality that is interesting as a subversion of the typical expectation of the protagonist as hero. This is interesting as well as it is disconcerting for the audience, as we come to form a parasocial relationship, there's that term again, with our protagonist and wish for him or her to succeed in their endeavors. As such, those endeavors turn darker, and in turn, the audience is drawn further and further down the rabbit hole, as the extent of their bond with protagonist is tested. A series like Breaking Bad or Death Note forces the viewer to ask him or herself, what do they prefer? The guise of being a moral person, or in supporting their friends? As I have explicated in my last video, we tend to very often side with our friends. We want to support those that we care about. This is why, despite the ending of Breaking Bad having Walter White ultimately being a serial murder, master criminal, and drug dealer, people actively mourned his death in public. A character that we knew from the outset had a date with death. Similarly, and this leads back to my fourth point that I despised about this film, and fuck, I said I wasn't going to belabor the individual issues I have with it, but I just can't. Here's 4. That the ending, despite being very similar in terms of the passing of the Death Note, all according to Keikaku, leading to the death of L, being quite similar in execution to that of the manga and anime, is completely wasted because all of the cleverness, as well as all of the depravity of light is transferred to Mia, making it not only unbelievable, but utterly pointless and without emotional payoff, particularly since Elle doesn't die in the film, and we're now being told that this isn't just a one-off movie, but one in a series. Unlike Breaking Bad, where we see, in the words of Vince Gilligan, Mr. Chips becomes Scarface, we never see anything about nerdy autismo light Turner go from this.
Your poetry sucks.
It's not poetry. Will you just read the last entry? I have, and you sound a little crazy, but I have a death god. Can I kiss you?
You're not supposed to ask.
To this.
Mia Sutton is killed when she accepts the death note from her boyfriend. As the Northwest Ferris wheel mysteriously collapses, she pulls the page with my name on it from the note, and it is ultimately consumed by fire. Although her boyfriend lands safely in the water, Mia strikes the shoreline, dying instantly.
And spoilers, because don't fucking watch this abortion, I watch it so you don't have to. We don't see any character development. Anything bad that could have been placed upon Light is ultimately placed upon Mia. And that leads me to my last major complaint about this entire film. 5. This movie has absolutely no reason to exist beyond being an attempt at a cynical cash grab on the back of a recognized franchise title and intellectual property. Look, so I'm a political / social sciencey type YouTuber person, I guess. I'm not Red Letter Media. I'm no Ralph Seppi. I'm no Your Movie Sucks. I'm no ER. All people that you should check out if you're not already. And hey, since I do occasionally like to show off my dumb posters and fan shit, here's 2 of my RLM posters and my copy of Space Cop on Blu-ray. But the point in mentioning all those great YouTube content creators is because they have all pretty much brought up the cynical nature of Hollywood multiple times. And it's not hard to see if you're paying even the slightest bit of attention to recent releases in cinema and television. And hey, maybe even if you haven't actively noticed it, your brain did. Almost all films and television shows made in current year are either some form of adaptation of another form of media, a remake, a reboot, a soft reboot, or a sequel. Original ideas are frankly risks, and Hollywood, for some reason... is totally obsessed with profit margins. But really, movies are a massive investment. They cost millions of dollars, and as such, an original idea is risky business. Literally. As such, what do we see in Hollywood? Lots of well-established IPs, and very few unique new ideas. And that's the only thing the Death Note movie was, as far as I can tell. A shitty, cynical cash grab designed to make a few bucks, or at least to draw a few eyes towards Netflix, using a well-established franchise. Part of making a cynical cash grab, though, means playing things safe. Just as playing the ideas themselves are safe, that also means playing to the largest audience possible. Contrary to everything SJWs and leftists seemingly believe, or at least want to believe, the United States is still a majority Caucasian country, with black people making up about 13%, and Asians, moreover, making up a mere 4% of the population. It doesn't matter that there is a relatively larger percentage of Asian people on the West Coast and West Coast cities such as Seattle. They still comprise, in Seattle, a mere 8.4% of the populace. Even if Asians made up 50% of the Seattle population, casting all Asians would still not represent or reflect the United States population at large. So for all of the SJW complaining about the argument that setting the film in the United States is rationale for why protagonists are majority white, with one of the main characters also being black and one of the secondary characters being Asian, out of the massive cast of about 5 people, oh, yeah, that is basically fairly representative of the United States populace, and therefore a very safe breakdown of casting to appeal to the widest possible audience of United States viewers. And by the way, as I just mentioned, keep this in mind. There really are only 5 characters in this film. There's Light, white, L, black, Mia, white, Light's father, white, as would make sense, and Watari, L's adoptive father, who is fucking an Asian man. So when someone cries that there aren't any Asians in any prominent roles in this film, just be aware that the denouement of the film and its entire ending chase and action sequences all revolve around the Watari character. He is the impetus behind the ending of the movie, for fuck's sake. But here's my point. All of these movies that have come under fire of late for supposed whitewashing are whitewashing not because of some deep-seated racist underbelly in Hollywood. I mean, have you seen who makes up Hollywood? Oy vey! But no, this is not about racism. This is about the maximization of profits. And the best way to make the biggest buck is to have the cast of your film represent the average American population as closely as possible. And to place that cast in a milquetoast, harmless, and inoffensive, unoriginal script based on a pre-existing intellectual property. So, what do? You replace sociopath egomaniac like Yagami with an ultimately and relatively innocent, awkward white teenager in the most stereotypical urban high school setting possible, give him a cute love interest, center the plot around their relationship, throw in a revenge motive rather than a cat and mouse plot, and completely waste the brilliance of Willem Dafoe, and what are frankly some really cool looking visual effects. Yep, that's it. That is the formula to get the biggest bang for your buck. Let's look at some other prominent and recent examples. As such, we must look at and address Ghost in the Shell, which, much like Death Note, is an adaptation of a much older anime to live-action Western film. Exactly like Death Note, the film drew massive rage from ideologues and silly lefties as soon as it was announced that Scarlett Johansson would be set to play the original animated film's protagonist and star of much of the franchise, Meiji Kusanagi Matoko. Of course, the same people crying whitewashing seemingly didn't take the time and consideration that they gave to L's character to explicate how race was apparently unimportant to him to understand how race is a completely bizarre concept to be concerned with when it comes to the character of Major Kusanagi Matoko, given that she is a fucking cyborg, a human brain in a robot body, a ghost in a shell, fucking get it. As such, the Major's physical form has no race, only a cybernetic body that could look like anything or anyone. In the original film, she has bright blue eyes, but in later series, such as Standalone Complex, she has purple-reddish eyes, neither of which, as far as I know, are characteristics typically associated with people of Japanese descent. But that is part of the fucking point. The Major is very arguably not human, and Ghost in a Shell as a series is a transhumanist exploration of the very concepts of what it means to be human. Is the person the body, or the mind, or some complex combination of the interactions therein? Transhumanists often debate the extent to which the physical body plays a role in the formation of the sense of the self. Everything we experience is experienced through the confines of our physical form, which is subject to our social identities, our physical differences, as well as the various theoretical senses of the self, from our looking glass perception of the self, as Cooley described it, of the self in contrast to others, to further other related concepts of personal identity and self-concept. Who am I? Why am I here?
Why was I made? Who made me? And what did they make me for?
All of these senses of the self are what make up our personal identity, and all of which is inalienably connected to the physical form on some level. For how can we experience any of this without our physical bodies? Therefore, were we to completely remove the mind from the experience of the physical, are we still the same person? Am I still me? This, by the way, is the kind of shit I love to talk about, and why series like Ghost in the Shell I find fascinating, but, well beyond the scope of this video, though. We certainly could do some in-depth discussions on transhumanism, since that's my fucking jam. Put me in a robot body already, thanks. Anyway, all of that is irrelevant. The fact is that even the owner of the franchise didn't give a single fuck that they cast a white woman as the Major, and in the context of the fictional world and universe that the Ghost in the Shell exists in, there is a legitimate rationale for why the Major may not be a Japanese or Asian woman. More so than there may even be than for Turner, to be a white kid even when you're setting the adaptation in Seattle, which once again is majority white. None of that matters though, because the world of Ghost in in the Shell has nothing to do with why Scarlett Johansson was cast as Major Kusanagi. Nor does racism or desire to whitewash a Japanese franchise. No, it has nothing to do with it. And here's why. Here's the reality, plain and simple. Ghost in the Shell, much like Death Note, was a cynical cash grab. Max Landis, for as much of an absolutely pants-on-head retarded leftist he often is, and I mean, come on Max, even I don't look this embarrassing, explained perfectly why ScarJo was cast last year, and was, well, predictably, lambasted by his predominantly left-leaning followers for having the chutzpah to point out the fucking truth. That right now there is no major Asian leading lady that pulls in the big buckaroos at the box office. Not that there never has been a major Asian leading lady. 15 years ago, Lucy Liu would have been the most realistic choice for Hollywood execs to cast as Major Kusanagi. And trust me, the scene involving the Major's mother, a Japanese woman, much like any scenes involving Johnny and Sue Storm and Sue's adoptive father, would have raised far fewer eyebrows of questioning why this woman randomly welcomes her in and then feels an instant familial connection to her. Had Liu been playing Major Kusanagi and not Scarlett Johansson. And for Liu to get that role, she would still have to be a young, hot actress. And by hot, I actually do mean popularity-wise. She's still pretty fine at 48 if you ask me. I mean, goddamn, they say black don't crack, but yellow don't mellow either, now do it. Well, anyway, excuse my horrible racism. Let's take a listen to Max Landis.
It doesn't matter how good the actor is, it doesn't matter what race there is, it's just their track record, and even sometimes their track record doesn't matter. There are no A-list female Asian celebrities right now on an international level. It's infuriating. There used to be, in the 90s, there used to be diversity in our A-list actors. Jackie Chan and Jet Li were famous at the same time. They could both get movies made. We don't have that guy anymore. We don't even have Lucy Liu anymore. We don't even have like one you can name. And that's not the fault of the movie industry, really. That's culture, and it's movies getting more and more afraid because movies make less and less money. Even though the huge movies make more money than ever, the little movies don't make as much. And a risky movie with a crazy concept like Ghost in the Shell, you better fucking believe they're gonna cast Scarlett Johansson because they need the movie to work.
I have to agree. I recommend you watch the entire 5-minute video and also watch Max's appearance on Best of the Worst at Red Letter Media.
How much stock footage is in this movie? Is it a little bit or a lot?
This movie is nothing but stuff. It's meaningless, empty stuff that has no purpose. But it's the best stuff. It's the best stuff that has ever been.
But anyway, that's it. All this shit about who is popular in Hollywood and who is going to rake in the dollary dues, that is who gets movies made. Now, I would have said my top pick for Major Kusanagi, again, only if to make things less awkward in the scenes with the mother. Although, you know what, on the flip side, again, had this been real pure kino, and not a cynical cash grab, the racial disparity between Major Kusanagi and her mother, between her mother being a Japanese woman and the model of her cyborg body, could actually have been fucking brilliant, exploring the complex and difficult questions raised by transhumanist thought in that, what does it mean to be human? But that is the furthest thing from the makers of the Ghost in the Shell's adaptation. Well, where was I? Oh yes, had I have had the choice, I would have cast Kikuchi Rinko, Mako, from the film Pacific Rim. Or how about Jin Tian, a Chinese actress who recently starred in Kong Skull Island as well as The Great Wall? Why not cast either one of them? Well, that certainly would bring in the Chinese market, at least in terms of Jin Tian, which is now the new major concern for Hollywood, seeing as they can make an easy buck by giving the foreign audience a visual spectacle with little to no plot, with no fear of losing this new deep pocket audience in translation. Again, we know why we didn't get Kikuchi Rinko as our major, but it would have probably helped the Asian market audience, right? Instead, however, the creators of Ghost in the Shell took the middle ground to represent the average American with a pretty strong, independent white woman as the protagonist, yet still set the film in Japan with tons of Asian culture imagery to appeal to those Asian audiences they want so deeply. Although, you know, you probably could have been a little bit less grotesque about it if you really wanted the Asian market to dig it. Oh, wait! Never never mind. Didn't fucking matter at all. It still made money overseas, particularly in China and Japan. Well, fuck me running. This is all a money scheme, folks. Even if Ghost in the Shell was ultimately a financial flop in the long run with the international audiences, it did make money, even if not a lot. It was still a carefully crafted attempt at making as much dosh as they could. This is not about whitewashing. This is not about racism. This is about appealing to the largest possible audience, and it always fucking has been. Truly, yes it has. Sure, there used to be a bit more integrity in cinema, all of which was irreparably changed by the introduction of the summer blockbuster with films like Jaws and Star Wars. But Hollywood has always sought to appeal to the common man. No real shit there, is there? To represent the audience that it is appealing to. Now yes, at one point, racism was certainly a part of this, and as with many things, Hollywood was a place where minorities were severely disadvantaged and had to fight and struggle to get roles. And then, even if they did get roles, rarely saw anything outside of plain stereotypes. And by the way, you can thank the Democrat Party for the longevity of systematic racism that has gone on in this country. But racism has been essentially eliminated in any systematic function in the current year. I must say though, it is one of the things that was so monumentous about Star Trek and Gene Roddenberry's dream for a post-identity, post-scarcity socialist utopia, featuring the first aired interracial kiss on national television. I mean, for fuck's sake, even Martin Luther King Jr. saw the value of Star Trek as groundbreaking for Hollywood and cinema. I'll let Nichelle Nichols tell the story in her own words, and by the way, I have heard her say this in public and tell this story, and to say I didn't get a little tear in my eye would be an absolute fabrication.
I told Gene after the end of the first season that I would not be returning to the show.
We terrified and overwrought.
That I wanted to return to my first love, which is musical theater. But I didn't know that meeting a Star Trek fan would change my life. I was told that fan wanted to meet me, and I turned and looked into the face of Dr. Martin Luther King. I was breathless. He says, yes, I'm the Trekker. I'm a Star Trek fan. And he told me that Star Trek was one of the only shows that his wife, Coretta, and he would allow their little children to stay up and watch. And thanked him, and I told him that I was leaving the show. All the smile came off his face, and he said, you can't do that. He said, don't you understand that for the first time, we are seen as we should be seen? You don't have a black role. You have an equal role. And when I went back to work on Monday morning, I went to Gene's office and I told him what had happened over the weekend. And he says, welcome home. We got a lot of work to do.
Well, thank you, Nichelle. But that was 1967, 50 years ago. Films with all black casts, or almost entirely black casts, have been made for a long time, starting with the blaxploitation genre for all of its own racist flaws, since the 1970s. But those films were also serving an audience who did not see themselves represented in the mainstream. And over time, mainstream Hollywood adapted and included more black actors to represent and reflect the nation at large. Again, with about 13% of the United States population in 2017 being black, 17% of the population being non-white Hispanic, and 4% Asian. This is because reflecting your audience accurately is, for one fucking last time, good for business. That doesn't mean that films or television aimed at specific groups is wrong in some way. There are plenty of Spanish-speaking television channels, for instance, and I don't think anyone minds them.
Switch it to the other news channel.
Channel 5 News. Amigos, tenemos...
Oh man, it's international. It's on every channel. These are the breasts we should focus on, Tom.
I find myself really interested in Mexican weather lately. I don't know what it is. Oh, fuck me, Dad. It's good just to learn about other cultures and, precipitation. Like, yeah, I may not know what Yannet Garcia is saying, but a part of me is okay. It's okay with all of this. 33 degrees, 56%. Like, I get the bullet points. I get the bloody bullet points, and that's all you need. Minima, maxima, notchy,
Yeah, all good.
There's also BET, and, well, I mean, there's not really an entire television station made specifically for Asians, but again, hey, you're 4%, and although that puts you at about the same percentage as homosexuals, and they do have several networks, I guess as such, yeah, I'm not sure why you don't have a big one either, except beyond the fact that Asian media is already pretty fucking amazing, and you really don't need us to attempt to adapt it.
さあパリッとどうだどうですか食べてない美味しい
どうですか
すげえ力なんじゃないこれ
Not only because I don't know why you would desire us to, but also because your media is already fantastic. And, well, we're just going to fuck it up, as I'm explicating with Death Note. There's no way that we're going to do it in earnest without a lot of hand-wringing intensifying either. And before you say something about how this is all still somehow racist, if perchance anyone who actually thinks that way has made it this far into this video, I asked you to look exactly at the Asian film and television organizations that exist in Asian countries, like I just mentioned. And look for the racial diversity. Look at Bollywood. Do you see whitey anywhere? Look at Japanese television. Where are all the black guys? Look at television in the Middle East. Yeah, I mean, sure, you'll get some familiar characters like Mickey Mouse, but no, that's not good at all. But where the fuck is the Australian Aboriginal representation there, huh? Nowhere? Maybe because media is made to reflect its audience. Because media is predominantly made to be profitable. And you can criticize that paradigm. It certainly is something that is criticizable, and something that has landed us in the waking nightmare that is the entertainment media industry, being a soulless, depressing parade of tired remake, reboot, and rehash, one after another, that we consume ad nauseum like candies in a box of chocolates.
Life is like a box of chocolates. Cheap, thoughtless, perfunctory gift that nobody ever asks for. Unreturnable because all you get back is another box of chocolates. So you're stuck with this undefinable whipped mint crap that you mindlessly wolf down and there's nothing else left to eat.
Until, you know, we finally embraced the sweet arms of death. None of this shit, though, is about racism. It is all about money. You think M. Night Shyamalama Ding Dong cast a bunch of horribly untalented but cute white kids to represent what you could argue are an East Asian boy and two native Alaskan kids? This guy? Really? Him?
Her?
You think he has an issue with brown people, huh? Of course, yeah, internalized racism or something like that, but no, that's not it. Let's get real. No, because the shitty Avatar movie was a pathetic attempt to siphon some shekels given the massive popularity of the cartoon show upon which it was based, while also probably hoping a couple of people might confuse the title with James Cameron's own remake of Dances with Wolves into walking into the theater and paying for a ticket. And no, they walk into the theater and what did they see? A couple of cute, if completely inept, white child actors, representing the majority of the United States population. Are you seeing how this is all very precise and measured, calculated series of decisions to maximize profits? That's all it is. And one last point about that, for all the people who cried about Danny fucking Rand, yes, such an Asian name, not being played by an Asian actor in Iron Fist and in The Defenders, Danny Rand is fucking a white guy and always has been. Much like with Ghost in the Shell, the obvious in-universe explanation for why the Major may appear white. In the case of Danny Rand, the outcry regarding his race was evident to the people who were apparently so incensed about the handling of the source material being whitewashed were completely unfamiliar with the fucking said source material. Well, imagine my shock. Here's the point. Hollywood is a business. Movies are a product. Hate that all you want. Hey, I'm sure not happy about it. But rather than cry and screech about a shitty movie with abysmal ratings because of the racial composition of the cast, why not judge these shitty, cynical cash grabs for what they are and on their own merits, or more accurately, for lack thereof? It's not difficult to see why Hollywood continues to make these types of films. Because they're aiming for the big fat paycheck. It doesn't mean that homages or adaptations cannot exist and be successful both from a financial and from a cinematic standpoint. For example, I briefly mentioned Pacific Rim, and, think what you want of the film, but it was Guillermo del Toro's love letter to mecha and kaiju films, both Japanese cinematic concepts that, despite being a massive endeavor, was in fact a unique idea. Not a remake, not a reboot. Starring a Japanese actress as well as a black man, Idris Elba, and a white guy as well, and was frankly just kind of fucking weird, but weird in a wonderful way. So go and support big films like that when they are rarely made. Or much better, go and support tiny independent filmmakers if you're so disgusted by big Hollywood, which is again, no different than Bollywood or fucking Wakaliwood in terms of representing the racial demographic of the country in which it exists. Oh please, I implore you, fly to Uganda and tell Nobwana Isaac Godfrey Jeffrey that his movies don't have enough Hispanic or white or Asian people. Oh please, be my guest. If you find that movies make you want to be dead, just analyze why it is that they make you feel that you want to be dead. And I think you'll find very quickly that the real fault isn't whitewashing, it's cynicism. It's the utter destruction of artistry in favor of endless money-grubbing profiteering. Don't like it? Don't pay for it. As I said in my last video, vote with your wallet, and then torrent anything that you might have a passive interest in watching, because the Chinese and Russian and other foreign markets eat that shit up like ambrosia flowing from the teat of Columbia herself. And there's absolutely nothing you can do about that. So here's my takeaway. Put your tray table up, place your head between your legs, get what enjoyment you can from this shit, and kiss Kino goodbye. Or do that, but also, as I said, support independent filmmakers. I've mentioned Red Letter Media, of course, and Ralph Seppi, both of whom are independent filmmakers that you should absolutely check out and support when you can. And while I can't say that I really enjoyed Space Cop, Ralph Seppi's short film King Candy, for example, despite being, I'll admit, derivative of The Wolf of Wall Street, is a fantastic short film on a shoestring budget. Although Red Letter Media is all middle-aged white guys, and Ralph Seppi, despite being a Jew, is also ostensibly white. Play that Jew shit up, by the way, Ralph. I think it's the only reason Mel Brooks films aren't getting blacklisted at this time of rampant supposed whitewashing.
Hey boys, look what I got here. Hey, where are the white women at?
Along with shit like Gone with the Wind, despite having the greatest cinematic capture of smacking a bitch I've ever recorded. Yeah, play that shit up. Start wearing a yarmulke or something, my friend. Anyway, I've lost topic. The thing is, you should support these people. Anyone who really believes in whitewashing, and I'm pretty sure that at this point there is no one here in this video who has sat through this much of my rambling for the same reason I think I'm not getting demonetized. My videos are just too long and perhaps maybe not so much loquacious as I would like to tell myself that they are, as they are incoherent rambling. But consider a few things. 1, what is the role of Hollywood as a business other than to make money? 2, what are the demographics of race in the United States, wherein Hollywood operates and has historically produced films predominantly to appeal to? And 3, consider what is more likely, that there is a massive anti-minority conspiracy going on in Hollywood, or that there is a cream paradigm going on in Hollywood. Cream being, of course, cash rules everything around me. Think about it, take a second, and it should be fucking obvious. As much as I've railed against Death Note as a movie and insisted that it's only a cash grab, it certainly could have been worse, I'll say that. Again, Willem Dafoe is perfect as Ryuk, and many of the visuals are quite enjoyable. The film falls apart in its poor performances, rushed plot, dropped character development, and complete mishandling of the themes of its source material, but yes, it was pretty to look at. And what other movie could I describe using almost that exact same set of review criteria? Oh, Ghost in a Shell, right. And while Wingard was probably a much better choice for director than someone who gave no shits about the film or its source material, see Shamalama Ding Dong, as he was clearly familiar with the source material. Again, it could be worse, but it was still pretty shit. Perhaps it's my own cynicism that prevents me from being able to fully appreciate what, on Wingard's part, may have been a genuine attempt to Americanize the film for some purpose other than reaching a wider audience, given that certain bizarre elements such as Elle's perching and erratic behavior and obsession with candy still exist in the film. But any attempt to maintain elements of the source material seemed to me utterly lost in the movie's typical American high school romance plot, which honestly makes you want to puke. Regardless of whether or not Death Note was intended to be a cynical cash grab aiming for the widest audience possible and relying on an established franchise, that is what it is, along with pretty much every other film like it. A bland, unoffensive, safe bet with a cast that represents the United States population in general. It's not racism, it's not whitewashing, it's just business as usual. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. I'm Aiden Paladin, Alto.